Welcome home. We are WNST. Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We're positively taking the Maryland Crab Cake Tour on the road, but you have to wait till the end of the month. The Cheatstros come in on the 23rd. We will be down at Fadley's. I'm wearing they were established in 1887, but moved into the new Lexington market in April of 2024. Come on down. Grab yourself a Maryland Lottery Gold Rush Sevens doublers by the time we get to September, and I have a full slate. We're going to be at Coco's on the 4th. We're going to be at Fadley's on the 6th of September. We're going to be having the Raven scratch-offs by then. Liberty Pure Solutions keeps our water crystal clear. They can do the same for you as well as your plumbing. They did plumbing job for me last month as well. Had a corroded pipe, and they take care of you at Liberty Pure Solutions. They also keep my water crystal clear if you have a well, you need them. Also, our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, you know exactly what they do. They put you out onto the road, like onto training camp, where Luke will be this week, like to Camden Yards, where he will be next week because the Orioles are out of town all week. We welcome Luke Jones in. You can follow him at Baltimore Luke. He is our Oriole and Raven insider because they let him in. They don't let me in, but they let him in, and he's been there sweating it out with the football team. But we're not here to talk about next month. We're here to talk about this month. And boy, what an interesting season the Orioles have had. I think we knew all along. We thought, well, in April and May, they're just going to win 109 games. They're just going to float to the World Series, and it's all going to be easy. And Bradish is going to start game 2. And I mean, the lineup this weekend, you tweeted out. There were names in there I didn't recognize. But more than that, Holiday now and Mayo now, all of our wildest Norfolk, as Melanie Newman, Norfolk dreams would portend back in April and May. Like, this is a way different lineup than anything you and I were talking about in April and May and June as to how they were going to beat the Yankees in the playoffs or beat the Indians in the playoffs. And they got off to a decent start this weekend by saving themselves on Saturday and Sunday.
I was just going to say, I mean, the tone of this conversation would have been much different if you and I had met on Saturday morning talking about what happened on Thursday and Friday. But a good finish to the weekend. And you said a different lineup from May and June. How about 2 weeks ago? If someone had told you what Saturday's lineup looked like 2 weeks ago, you would have said, did we go back to spring training suddenly or something like that? I mean, you have Austin Slater at the top of the lineup, who I'm guessing most Orioles fans had never even heard of before, and Eloy Jimenez, and go down the list. So it's a really odd time, Nestor, because you're tied for first place. You're now just under 50 games to go. I mean, we're not quite at sprint mode yet, but we're getting close to that mode.
And you were playing the team you're probably going to have to beat, more so than the Yankees.
Sure.
Probably.
Well, I mean, you're going to whatever your draw is. I mean, this is a team that's going to be in the mix somewhere. Now, if someone else knocks them off, then you'll have to deal with that team because Cleveland's pretty good. And we talked about this when the Guardians came to Baltimore not that long ago. But you know, the question for them has been the quality of their starting rotation. And what's ironic is the Orioles actually got to their bullpen a good bit over this weekend. But that's a really good baseball team. And I think what's so unique for the Orioles at this point, and you alluded to it with the different lineup, but you know, the bullpen as well. I mean, they have 2 new starters. It's this strange time that it's late in the season, yet it almost feels like early season watching this team because of how many new parts they have, that you have this, at least I do, as a baseball fan, as a reporter, as a writer, all of that, where I kind of want to see this breathe for a little while. To like, how's this going to settle in? What's the bullpen going to look like?
This is a different team than the one that was playing 650 ball 8 weeks ago. I mean,
sure.
And the wheels coming off the cart in July. I mean, this is an interesting season all the way around as to how Elias is going to manage this, Rubenstein's going to own this, Hyde's going to manage this, and then how the players actually go out and perform. Because, like, you think Adley Rutschman's and you want to, bronze him and send him to – and then he has a bad month in the middle of a pennant race. And then you're like, well, what do we have here? And you have a lot of guys with holes in their swings. You have a lot of guys that swing and miss. You have a lot of strikeout. You don't have a lot of walk guys. So you have a speed team, though. You at least you did. You thought you did when Mateo was there. So I don't know what they are anymore, because when I look at them, I'm like, I don't know what I'm getting out of Jackson Holiday and Kobe May, let alone Slater.
Yeah.
What do I know am I going to get out of it? These guys have been in the big leagues a week. I look up Holiday's hitting 120. I mean, I know it's a baseball card, but I look at it, I'm like, ooh, I mean, I know a lot of that's residual from earlier in the summer, but there's no there's only might be's in these bats, in these humans.
Right. I mean, to address Jackson Holiday, Jackson Holiday has been one of the bright spots since he's been called up. I mean, he's what, 7 for 18, I think it is. He's hit a couple home runs. The strikeouts he's had have been more a product of he's got rung up on a couple really, really bad calls.
We're gonna
I
do a
mean,
whole
not.
segment on umpiring,
Oh
right?
my goodness. And you know me, Nestor. I don't like complaining about umpiring. I don't like complaining about officiating. I noted it. I think it was Sunday, or early in Sunday's game. That weekend series was a clinic in favor of the automated strike system because, oh my gosh, that was just a lot of bad misses. Anyway, going back to Jackson Holiday. I mean, Jackson Holiday's, April's in the that's a long time ago. I mean, it's in the rearview mirror, and he looks a lot more comfortable. That doesn't mean he's going to just hit 300 the rest of the way. Let's be understanding of a 20-year-old player in the midst of a pennant race, but he's actually been one of those guys that's given them a little bit of a lift here. I mean, if there's something you could say about this weekend series and what the Orioles have done over the last week, even though there's still major questions about the pitching, even though their defense still needs to be better, and we're still seeing too many defensive lapses, I do feel better about what their offenses look like over the last week. I think it's come to life again. It's been some unexpected contributors like Jackson Holiday, like Eloy Jimenez, coming over from the White Sox and having some big games over the weekend for them. And you're still going to expect. You mentioned Adley Rutschman. I fully expect Adley Rutschman to start hitting again. I don't have any doubts in terms of who he is as a player, other than he's really struggled over the last 5 weeks, and that's something that any player can deal with. Go back and look at what Aaron Judge's numbers were for the Yankees the first month of the season, and how big of a story that was. And now look at what his numbers are now.
Well, once
Of
you're him, they don't send you back to Norfolk.
course.
They let you play through it, and sometimes that can be scuffly ugly. I mean, ask Ryan Mountcastle at various points and his on and off again offense. But in the case of Rutschman, it was alarming, but more than that, moving them down in the order, the lineup's different. They've changed the structure of what was making them successful. And if I were writing a column about that, I'd say, be careful. Be careful. You had a lot of success the way it was. Now you're second guessing what you have. At least it feels that way to me through the slump. It feels like they've changed a lot, and that's fine. You should change when things are broken, but they didn't feel broken the first 90 days, right?
Yeah, and look, I mean, we're not talking about drastic changes other than, I guess, Adley Rutschman, who hit first or second from about, what was it, late June or something like that of his rookie year, until being lowered to fifth in the order here recently. It's not like they lowered him to ninth, but it's been that. And Colton Cowser, who's moved into the leadoff spot, and he has a long hitting streak, and he's looked as good as he's looked at the plate since that 2 week Babe Ruth like stretch that he had back in April. So those have been good changes. I mean, I think if Adley Rutschman starts hitting again at some point here, and we're seeing some signs, had some knocks over the weekend, had some RBIs over the weekend, so that was good to see. He'll be back in the number 2 spot before too long, I would assume, unless everyone else is hitting so well that you just say, hey, we're going to keep it that way.
I
But
don't understand modern lineups, by the way. The modern analytics of Al Bumbry batting first, and the guy that's going to take pitches batting second, and the second best player batting third, and the cleanup hitter being your guy, and the fifth guy being the third best guy. Like, that's the way baseball was for 100 years. It doesn't work that way anymore.
um, really, first and foremost, batting order doesn't matter that much. I mean, it doesn't. Beyond, typically the analytics would tell you you want your absolute best hitter hitting second. And that's something that kind of became a thing with, I guess, Mike Trout with the Angels, 12 years ago now at this point in time. And now that's kind of become the norm. That's why Adley Rutschman was hitting second for the Orioles as
You
long
always
as he
wanted your
was.
fastest guy batting first, too. That was kind of
Yeah.
your
Well,
fastest guy that got on base. I mean, we're
well,
going
and that
back to
See, that's the
baseball
big
1972 and my dad taught it to me and I had to answer to me as to why who batted where. I'm not
right.
sure I really understand it anymore when I see lineups. It doesn't
I
make the same sense that the first 50 years did to me.
I think what you said still applies, except in the past, I think a fast guy was considered the top priority for the leadoff
Even if
spot,
he hit 220, right?
even if he had an on-base percentage of 290.
Right.
And I think in this day and age, you'd prefer to have a fast guy. Look, I mean, Cedric Mullins at one point in time was the Orioles leadoff guy because he got on base and was a much better hitter than what he's been, but can't justify that anymore. So that's why he hits at the bottom of the lineup or bottom third of the lineup. And they were using Gunnar, and that was, remember last year they were using Rutschman in the leadoff spot because of, hey, he's your on base guy. But that was something that I know he didn't love because, especially even just coming back from catching and having to take off your
Well, that's
gear
the
and then
whole
kind of
point.
rushing.
Adley Rutschman would have
Yeah,
never bat leadoff in any lineup that Gil
yeah,
Hodges or Earl Weaver or Casey
sure.
Stengel or Joe Torre would have ever filled out.
Sure. But really, and I just, I pulled back the curtain on a couple little things there. And yes, there are a couple spots here and there where you kind of want guys in certain pockets of the lineup. I think Jordan Westberg was hitting seventh a whole lot for the Orioles this year, was kind of almost like he was the prime run producer, the bottom half of the order, so to speak.
Well, you
But I
always
think,
wanted lefty righty because of pitching matchups,
yeah,
and that's changed a lot too because you can't have one batters anymore.
well, there's that, and also the Orioles are just so left-handed heavy, and maybe not quite as much now, but they generally that's what they've been over the last few years. I mean, their best hitters have been left-handed or switch hitters. So, but really, Nestor, I mean, there's one principle I think anyone should really subscribe to when it comes to batting order. You want your best hitters at the top of the order. Why? Because over the course of 162 games, that can equal 70 more plate appearances than they might have gotten if they're hitting fourth, fifth, sixth,
Every other
right?
night
So,
they're going to get a
yeah,
fifth or sixth at bat when
yeah,
the other rest of the lineup gets a third or fourth, right?
right. So it's really a big picture kind of thing. So I'm not someone who puts a whole lot of stock into batting order, but when you are scuffling, sometimes it's just as simple as, hey, change up the look. And I think Colton Cowser being someone who can draw some walks. Yes, he's a swing and miss guy, but we've seen swing and miss guys in the leadoff spot before as well. But I think that's been a welcome change for him. And it's allowed them to move Gunnar Henderson down to the number 3 spot. And we've seen Gunnar Henderson start swinging the bat. Not that he was awful. Not that he was having a slump like Adley Rutschman has had over the last 5 weeks, but we're starting to see the power start to come again, which is obviously a great sign for this Orioles
He's
lineup.
going to hit 40, huh?
You would think so. I mean,
Yeah.
he's what at 29 now. I mean, is he going to go on a tear like he did a couple months ago? I don't know about that, but he's going to hit home runs, and he's got a heck of a shot to finish with 40. And you've got Santander. I mean, you might have 2 40 home run hitters in this lineup, which is, even in this day and age, pretty impressive. So, I think it's been much more encouraging seeing this offense start to swing the bats better. Is it perfect? No. Are you still waiting on Kobe Mayo to get his first hit and for him to get his feet wet and kind of get acclimated? Sure. And I think that's to be expected. But if you have 7 or 8 other guys in the lineup that are swinging the bats better and swinging the bats well, then you can handle that. Because as it stands right now, I'd rather have Kobe Mayo's upside in there and kind of feeling it out and figuring it out over Ramon Arias because, okay, maybe Mayo's not going to swing the bat at a high level in the month of August, but that could pay dividends for September and maybe October.
We
And
better learn to hit the curveball. You better take care
sure.
of the outside part of
Well,
the plate.
I mean,
They're not going to groove him and they're going to
of
make him
course.
chase pitches. And then when you have umpiring like you did over the weekend, where the strike zone's got an extra 8 inches on the outside,
yeah.
yeah.
There was, man, I definitely had some memories of Eric Gregg and the 97 NLCS with a few of those calls, but
well, I'm going to coin this when we play them in 7 games in October after we take care of the first round and we're in the ALCS against them. I'm going to coin it the Cleveland strike zone. We're going to call it a Cleveland strike zone.
Yeah. And look, I mean, there's something to be said about pitch framing and different things of that nature. Sometimes just luck. Sometimes some teams, there are even statistics kept now, Nestor, and I'm not sure how much stock I always put into them, but there are statistics that will even try to break down how teams have benefited from calls from umpires, and not just ball strikes, but just kind of in a general sense. And it does feel like Cleveland, I feel like I've seen Cleveland very high, if not at the top of that list. They've been higher on that list, but they're a really good team. I mean, that Cleveland team is legit. And we talked about this a few weeks back when they came into Baltimore. And that lineup, it's not a lineup that wows you with 30 home run guys from top to bottom, but it's a good lineup.
Ramirez is a great player. I talked
he's
to Munch
yeah.
about that last week. Like seeing him at the All-Star game and seeing where his career's come. He's a guy you take.
Yeah, and Stephen Kwan. I mean, what's been so interesting about him this year? I mean, he was a high contact, few strikeouts, but also hadn't walked much. This year, he's added a little bit more walk pro. I mean, he walked twice on Sunday, for example, but he's got an on-base percentage of 392. Now he's hitting 333, so it's primarily been the batted ball that has that on-base percentage where it is, but he's gotten a little more on-base ability, and he's hitting for more power. I mean, he's slugging like 480. So you have two players like that. They made some nice additions. Naylor certainly has a big power profile.
And they have a closer.
Yeah, well, not just a closer. I mean, even though this wasn't the best showing for that bullpen, and the Orioles actually did some damage against their relievers, but it's an excellent bullpen. I mean, they've got 4 or 5 guys that, to me, you feel good about using in just about any spot. And that's what I've been saying and what I've been desiring to see for the Orioles in terms of you need that group of 4 or 5 that you can use just about any time. And yeah, there's going to be certain roles or certain slots or points in the game where you kind of ideally pitch someone, but you also know that your closer can't pitch every night. Your primary setup guy can't pitch every single night. So that's where you need depth, and that's where you need that. And even in October, even though you've got off days baked in and that helps things from a workload standpoint, you still want to have 4 or 5 guys that you feel really, really, really good about. And I think that's another interesting factor for the Orioles right now. And we saw this, Dominguez, even though it wasn't a save situation, he pitches the 9th inning on Sunday. We saw Yennier Cano pitch get the save on Saturday. I thought that was interesting. Kimbrel had pitched the night before, but there's a case where if you have arrested Cano and you just say, hey, go for it. We feel good about the matchups in the 9th inning and do it. That's why I've said, really since early in the season, Nestor, for me, it's never been, you've got to get Kimbrel out of the closer's role. For me, it's been, you've got to have at least another guy or two that you can trust in the closer's role, depending on the night, depending on how Kimbrel's pitching at the moment, all of those things. You need to have more flexibility. I think the worst thing you can do with a bullpen is to try to be too rigid with your roles, because sometimes the 8th inning might be more important than the 9th inning if the heart of the order is due up in the 8th inning and it's a 1-run game. And that might be the time where I use my best reliever. And then you know what? I'll take my chances with my second best reliever in the 9th inning, because I know that in the 8th inning, I'm facing, whether you're talking about Jose Ramirez or Soto and Aaron Judge or whatever team you're talking about. So,
well, in Batista's case, you'd have him just pitch the 8th and the 9th.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Ideally, I mean, you have someone like that. And there are a couple teams around baseball who might have a guy like that. But for the most part, you're not asking guys to go multiple innings. But, I think it's going to be fascinating. And we talked about this last week with the trade deadline and, adding Sir Anthony Dominguez to the picture and adding Gregory Soto, although, certainly his debut was very, very rocky. But you've got a couple other really lively arms that have been added to the mix. And now you're trying to figure out exactly what is this pen going to look like down the stretch. And that's also including the hope that Danny Coulombe's going to be back in September and knowing what he's meant for them. But I feel like you have a number of options, but for me, it's how exactly is that going to look? How exactly is Brandon Hyde going to settle in how he uses these guys? And it's going to be fascinating. That's why I said it's so odd, because we're into August, but in some ways it feels like April again, just because you have all these new pieces and you're trying to figure out exactly how it's going to look. So, good to see them finish the series on a high note and get a split, because I don't think anyone was feeling very good about how things were going into Saturday. And then you see the order that they used on Saturday. I'll still say this. I'm still not too keen on Austin Slater as a leadoff hitter, but hey, he got 2 knocks when he was leading off. So it worked for one night anyway. But
don't argue with the skipper when it works, man.
Sure. And sometimes it's just a matter of, hey, we're struggling. Let's get nuts. Let's get crazy. We're going to do something a little bit differently tonight. And that worked out for them. But, it's a really interesting dynamic because to your point, when you have a team that was on pace to win 100 plus games for the first 3 months of the season, and then they go through this kind of tailspin that they went through over the last month, and obviously they played better over the last 10 days or so. It's been better. Uh, Thursday and Friday in Cleveland aside, it's been better, but you just have so many new parts. And I was even hearing some of the MLB Network guys talking about this. I think was it Friday evening? It might have been before the game, and they were just saying, it's very unusual to see a team that had as much success as the Orioles had had through the first 3.5 months make as many changes as they did. And, it's not even saying that it was wrong or they shouldn't have done it or anything like that, but it's just a lot of new moving pieces, new moving parts. And with that, even if it works out, even if come mid-September, they're looking as formidable as they did back in April, May, and the first half of June, it's still going to take a little bit of time to let the dust settle and see what that looks like. And obviously, Jackson Holiday, you're hoping is a big part of that, and he's certainly looking much better. I mean, it's night and day what he looks like at the plate now compared to what he looked like in April. And in the case of Kobe Mayo, with the unfortunate injury to Westberg, I mean, it kind of forced their hand a little bit. But let Mayo play, let him go out there, as long as this doesn't morph into what Holiday looked like, where he's just striking out every at bat and so much swing and miss and looks clueless and all that. And I thought Mayo, his first couple games, I thought the at bats looked better. Sunday struck out 3 times, so that was a rougher go at it. But just let him play and let him figure this out. Let him get acclimated within reason, right? I mean, if he's completely overwhelmed 2 weeks from now, then we'll have a different conversation at that point. But I think you have some really interesting young players that you've added to the mix now. And now Eloy Jimenez, who, as I said to you, if things work out, he might be their Delman Young, right? He's not going to
I didn't
play
know
every
the
day.
special relationship he had with Hyde, right? Like,
yeah,
he
going
and
back to the
Hyde have
Cubs.
this
Yep.
thing. And, you could discuss him, but my next question for you was just an evaluation of Brandon Hyde, or whether we can listen. You're around the team. I'm not. I've never spoken to Brandon Hyde. I sat in 2 of his press conferences in my life. I don't even know what his job is anymore in regard to filling the lineup out. I watched Moneyball. I read Moneyball. I don't know whether Elias is making out the card or Hyde. There's all of this secrecy around baseball and around people like you that even have credentials to figure out who really is calling shots in organizations. I'm going to go traditional and say Brandon Hyde really manages the team, and when the game starts, Mike Elias has nothing to do with that. Although, as a fan 20 years into this, I don't believe that. But that being said, do they speak every day about lineup? Does Hyde feel, and how do we judge Brandon Hyde? Because I do think there's a point now where I look across dugouts and I see who he's managing against, and I start to think to myself, all right, who's the genius here? I saw the PC with him and Espada and their friendship and the sisters-in-laws, and Espada almost became the Orioles manager. He was sort of, had there been Vegas odds 5-6 years ago, he would have been one of those guys that was named. But the new generation of managers that came up this way, to have these wacky lineups, to have half of Norfolk up here, Norfolk up here in the middle of the pennant race, when you have no choice, you have no options. This is what you got. And then you're dealing for Eloy Jimenez, that he may have had a role in that. I'm sure he did to some degree. But boy, the thing for me that I would say today for all of our listeners and anybody, boy, they're managing a lot of change in the middle of something that they want to be special. The playoffs start in 7 weeks. And I look at the lineup and I'm like, you said spring training. I didn't get that vibe because, Kobe Mayer's not wearing number 87 or whatever, like he was down in Sarasota. But there is a point where I'm like, this would really be something if they go win the World Series and Jackson Holiday and Kobe Mayer are in the starting lineup and Austin Hayes is gone, and they're doing it with guys that we didn't know their names 8 weeks ago, or they weren't a part of the operation as we discussed it the first 120 days of the season.
Yeah, I mean, and I think in fairness, I mean, I think everyone expected Jackson Holiday to be back at some point. Whether it's going to be June, whether it's going to be
I
July, or
agree
whether
with. I think
yeah,
I even said he'll be in the
yeah,
starting lineup the night they have a playoff game. They they
yeah.
they 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 believe that they made us believe that. Yes, I
Right,
agree.
right. So I think, and obviously when you trade Norby as part of the Trevor Rogers trade, obviously that forced their hand a little bit to call him up a little bit more. But I think that was coming at some point anyway, right? I don't think if they didn't trade Connor Norby, I'm not buying that he would have just been their starting second baseman the rest of the way, or until Jorge Mateo came back from the dislocated elbow, if he's coming back, before the year's out. But I think with Mayo, I think that was always a little more, not that I didn't think he was going to be here because I thought he was going to be up at some point, but I think his role would have been different. And obviously, this was forced by the fact that they lost Jordan Westburg. Jordan Westburg, who has been their number two most consistent hitter behind Gunnar Henderson over the course of the year in terms of just being the best, and just counting on him and everything. I mean, you would have said Rutschman until the last week of June, but I mean, Westburg, that kind of player. He's an all-star for them. So you lose an all-star caliber player, it doesn't mean your season's over, but sure, you are going to be looking at some other people to step up and to step in. And not that anyone's expecting Kobe Mayo to put up Jordan Westburg numbers immediately, but I think everyone is aware of the power upside. You're talking about a guy who's been a top 15 prospect overall in baseball. Pretty much the consensus for him going into 2024. And now it's a matter of, okay, how's it look at third base? And the long-term question with him is it third base? Is it first base? Is he going to be a DH? So, that's part of what you're figuring out. But, in terms of Jimenez, in terms of Austin Slater, I mean, these were, we've talked about it in terms of them wanting to have a little more oomph from the right-hand side and to have a little more success against left-handed starting pitching, which had really become an issue for them recently. So you add those guys, and let's face it, they didn't give up anything for those guys. I mean, these were cash considerations, minor league arm that was considered more filler than real prospect. And in the case of Jimenez, I mean, the White Sox are paying for most of it, and it's really I don't even know if I want to say high reward, but certainly, it's a low risk kind of proposition, even if you get a moderate reward out of it. So, I think the thing that I would admire them on, and this is Hyde and Elias, and more specifically Mike Elias, is, they I don't want to say if it's bold, because it's not like you traded half your farm to bring in major league talent. That would have been really bold to go do something like that, where you traded a Mayo, where you traded a Samuel Basayo for major leaguers to come in and in the midst of a pennant race. So we're still talking about more so role guys. Eloy Jimenez, I don't think is going to become their everyday DH, but become their DH against left-handed starters, sure. I don't think Austin Slater is going to play a whole lot, but start against some lefties, sure, if he produces. So, you're talking about trying to add as much as they've added. That's a challenge. To go back to what you said about Brandon Hyde with the lineup and managing the bullpen, all of that. Look, I think we have seen enough of modern baseball, and the curtain's been pulled back enough, even if not with the Orioles, with other teams and other books written, and going back to the A's back in the early 2000s, or talking about the Astros, or even, the Pittsburgh Pirates a decade ago. There was a interesting book written about them and their front office at that point. But I think we know that it's much more collaborative than it used to be. I think there was a perception years back that you kind of had the general manager and the manager at the top of the pecking order, and they were kind of arm in arm, right? They were in lockstep. General manager made all the moves off the field, to bring the guys into the organization, and the manager took care of everything on the field. And it's not like that anymore.
General
It's much
manager
more
did the
collaborative.
grocery shopping, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I
And the
think,
manager cooks the meals.
yeah, but even with that, I mean, I think, the perception has been that the field manager is much more middle management now, and the general manager is at the top of the food chain. And obviously, where the owner fits in there, where the
Well,
team
that's why
president
when I
fits
see
in.
this batting order and I see things, I'm like, is this Hyde's decision or is this Elias saying, hey, I just got Slater, put him in? And
Yeah,
I'm thinking, if you got Slater, why didn't you just keep Hayes? But that's just me.
well, because you wanted Sir Anthony Dominguez. I mean,
Right.
really.
Fair enough.
So, and let's face it. I mean, Austin Hayes Had he been better, sure. But
I didn't think he wanted to be here anymore at one point, right? When he wasn't playing.
I
That was
don't
the
think
vibe I got when he got to Philly. It was time for change for him, for the player who was sitting on the bench 4 days a week, 5 days a week.
Yeah, I mean, and let me be clear. I don't think I myself, and we talked about this a week and a half ago. I mean, with whether there was anything going on behind the scenes, anything like that. I never got any whiff that Austin Hayes was a malcontent or was miserable or anything like that. But I think he wanted to play, and I think there was a case of, and Dave Dombrowski talked about this when the Phillies acquired him. They had inquired about Austin Hayes the last couple of years, actually. Dave Dombrowski flat out said, we tried to get this guy the last 2 years, and the price point didn't align between the Orioles and us.
They were going to deal him last year. He was an all-star, right?
Sure, exactly.
Thinking more like giving him money and signing him last year, right?
Right. Well, I mean, some people were talking about it. I was
Not
never
Luke.
thinking they were going to do that. Well, not just
you like Austin Hayes.
I like Austin Hayes. I didn't like Austin Hayes enough to extend him, and I think that's proven out. But I wasn't. There are lots of people who felt that way, and you can like players without wanting to marry them long term, right? There's a difference.
See Anthony Santander. Yeah, he'll be that guy, right?
Well, I think there's a more interesting conversation about him, but we'll save that for at least closer to the end of the season. But I think with the lineup construction, with how you use your bullpen, I think for an analytically minded team like the Orioles, I don't know this for certain, but I would assume they look at the matchups. They look at how all their guys are faring. They'll look at history against pitcher. I think the way that Brandon Hyde proceeds with his lineup construction, I think it really lends itself to the Orioles. And I don't think this is Brandon Hyde doing this in isolation, because I think if Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal and the other upper level lieutenants in baseball operations disagreed, I think it would be shared with Brandon Hyde. So I think it's collaborative, but they care a lot about righty-lefty splits and getting the matchup there. They don't necessarily care about what the short-term righty-lefty numbers look like. I think just in general, they want to have a platoon advantage in terms of right-handers facing left-handed pitchers and left-handed bats facing right-handed pitchers. I think they think in a big picture sense, that's the best way to go. So I think what you end up seeing is there is most likely a lineup that is kind of suggested or spit out from a computer for a lack of a more specific, sophisticated way of putting it. And I think they go from there. And I do think Brandon Hyde ultimately makes out the lineup, but I think that's done with a lot of information that's presented to him, if that makes sense. I think it's not 100% collaborative. I think he has the final say on something like that, but I do think there are other people involved in that. There are computer models and statistics and everything that goes into that.
Well, I know with pitching, it's an if this, then that. I know they meet at 2:00 in the afternoon and say, all right, we're in the 6th inning. We're ahead. We're behind. We go lefty, righty. This is where we're going to match up. This guy's tired. Can't pitch Kimbrel tonight.
Yeah, he's down.
These guys,
tonight, right.
Who's available? Who can we pick through? If this, then that. Let's scrimmage it earlier in the day. He's scrimmaging it. He's a manager of the team. He scrimmaged it in a hotel this morning in Toronto, right? Like literally. But that's how this works these days, right?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of collaboration. And frankly, there should be. I don't care if you're a first-year manager. I don't care if you've been at it 6 years like Brandon Hyde at this point, or if you're someone who's been doing it for 25 years. I mean, don't shy away from information. Don't shy away from more information and more statistics that can help you figure things out. And look, that doesn't mean that that's the end all be all either. And sometimes there is some gut that has to go into it. And you do have to have a feel for it. And, I've talked about this. I'm a Brandon Hyde guy, but there have been times where I would have liked to have seen him leave the starting pitcher out there to try to get another out or two. Or there have been times where I'd like to see him stick with a reliever for another batter or two rather than going to the next guy and feeling like maybe you're using a little bit too much of your bullpen, especially if it's a 4 or 5 run game. But we can say this about any manager. I mean, you can second guess anything. And that's part of why we love baseball, right? It's a slow enough pace where you can kind of think about those things on the fly and say, okay, he's got this guy up in the pen. right-handers do up, but they also got this lefty on the bench that they could pinch hit for. Keep in mind the next two guys you got to think about because it's the 3-batter minimum. So, from that standpoint, no, Brandon Hyde's not infallible. I mean, he's certainly makes his share of decisions that I kind of look at and say, that's not what I would have done. But to your point, and to the point I'm trying to make here, without saying it definitively, because the Orioles are very secretive when it comes to these processes and proprietary information and what they view as, okay, there's the commercial mainstream stats that are out there that anyone can get at Baseball Reference or ESPN or Fangraphs or whatever, but we also have more information, and some of that's just the narrative in terms of how's Craig Kimbrell feeling, or does CNL Perez have a sore back or something like that. I mean, different things that go on over the course of a season, but it is collaborative. There is a lot of scrimmaging. There is a lot of computer modeling that kind of gives them an idea of what a lineup might look like, and then you go from there and you tweak that. I don't think, not at all suggesting that the front office makes a lineup and Brandon Hyde has no autonomy whatsoever. No, that's not how it works. And in the midst of the game, he's making bullpen and pitching decisions, right? Now, they might have scrimmaged that. They might have talked about that in their beginning of the series meetings or meetings earlier in the day, but you get to that moment, it's not as though Mike Elias is calling him on the bullpen phone and say, hey, bring in Sir Anthony Dominguez right here. No, it's not.
You better
anything
hope
like
they
that.
talked about that earlier. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean,
you ever play Stratomatic, Luke? You're too young for Stratomatic baseball. Or?
I'm aware of it, but no, I never played it. I never played it. So
the things you kids missed out on by not being born too late, being born in '83,
right? Totally. So,
well, I made a lot of Stratomatic lineups is what I guess I'm after. And, we all make lineups, but I'm not nuts to think that this last week or two has been a little screwy. And certainly we don't talk about the lineup much, right? We didn't talk about Rutschman and Henderson when they went to the top of the lineup last year, right? Or to say how or why, or what happened to Al Bunbury and, what happened to Brady Anderson. And, but that being said, the lineup has been something that at least from the fan base perspective, especially when anybody who's not perceived as going to the Hall of Fame, anybody that's not Holiday, Mayo, Rutschman, they can't start Westberg anymore. He's going to the Hall of Fame now. Nobody could have told me that a year and a half ago. He went from Rich Dower to Scott Rowland overnight, like literally, right? But that being said, the lineup has been something that the Twitter types, by the way, I'm glad I'm not on Orioles Twitter, whatever that is. I've seen pictures of these people, and for the last 15 years, I'm glad I'm not in that daily argument of Rutschman should bat third, not first, like on and on and on and on. But on the nights when there's a lesser lineup, it is perceived as Hyde's just giving up tonight, and it's sort of absurd. Like people that haven't watched baseball, you have all these players. It's not Stratomatic. You don't have the same lineup every night.
Yeah, and guys do need nights off, and you do want to keep some of your bench players in the mix a little bit more, because at some point in time you might be calling on them to pinch hit. And if, by the way, if they've sat on the bench for the last 6 days and they haven't moved and they're collecting splinters, they're probably not going to be good in that pinch hitting situation. So I hear some of it. And look, there are times where I'll look at a lineup, like, for example, would I have put Austin Slater in the leadoff spot on Saturday? No. And I understand starting him against a lefty, sure. But the idea of him in the leadoff spot, and I get what his career numbers look like against left-handed pitching, but go look at what his left-handed splits are this year, against lefties this year. It hasn't really hit anybody. That's why he was available for nothing, basically, for cash. So, but beyond that, I mean, I don't make too much of it. And I do think the thing that, and we even talked about this a couple weeks ago, and obviously it's changed now because they've made some trades, obviously injuries. But the thing that I always see that would always kind of make me laugh is people saying, I just want Hyde to play our best 9, to which I would reply, who exactly is that right now? And, that would be at a time where I feel like people were saying that a few weeks ago when Colton Cowser was kind of scuffling and people wanted to see Heston Kjerstad rather than him in the lineup. And
we've seen all of these guys struggle other than Henderson, right? Like almost everybody else in the lineup, including Rutschman right now, we've looked at Mullins. We've complained about all of these guys. Westberg before he went out. I mean, last year it was sort of early on, and Mayo's not hitting the ball now. Holiday was awful in April. Like Like, we can go through all of these players and
Santander
find,
had a stretch where he didn't really
yeah,
swing the
they've
bat all
all
that
had a
well. Yeah.
hole at one point, right? Some of them are one-dimensional. They
Right.
only hit right-handers or left-handers, right?
Right. And that's the other factor too. I mean, some of these guys are meant to be guys that aren't going to play every day, and they're going to, for example, I mean, I think we're seeing more and more Cedric Mullins doesn't play against left-handed starters anymore. I think you want, not that Kowser's great against left-handed pitching, but I think it's an opportunity to have him still get at bats against lefties and hold his own, and then he can play center field, and he plays center field at a high level as well. And then you get Austin Slater, or before that it was Austin Hayes, or whoever in the lineup. So, I think a lot of this, look, a lot of this is just baseball, and I think every market you have fans that are going to question. Fans and media are going to question the lineup, or wonder about the lineup, and wonder about bullpen usage, and whether you should have pulled your starting pitcher at this point. Should you have pulled him earlier? Should you have left him in there for a little bit longer? So that's baseball. That's the everyday grind of baseball. And when you just think about how we react to the Ravens, who play once a week, compared to the Orioles, who play every day, and the number of decisions that any head coach or any manager or any pitching coach or offensive coordinator or whatever, the number of decisions that they make, the sheer volume of decisions in baseball is just so high that, yeah, it's going to lend itself to some second guessing. Some of the second guessing to me is more legitimate than most of it, which I think most of it is just fans being emotional at that point in time. And that's okay. Look, I mean, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. But I think, the Orioles are like any other team in that way, where, yeah, you're going to question some moves, and there are going to be some times like on Saturday where they're mocked, and that lineup ends up doing a nice job for them. Or there are going to be times where it's a lineup that you like, and they go out there and they get 3 hits, and they only manage 2 runs. So, that a lot of that is just baseball, and there's a lot of failure baked into this game. I mean, a lot of failure baked into the game. And I think more often than not, we overrate the influence that a manager has. It doesn't mean a manager doesn't have influence. It doesn't mean he's not important. But, over the course of the last month, do I think Brandon Hyde was the biggest reason why the Orioles were struggling? No, far from it. I think the biggest reason why the Orioles were struggling is their players weren't producing at a level that you've come to expect them to produce, how they produce. So, it feels like they're getting back towards that. But now it's a little more unique, because I think Hyde and Elias and, the front office and anyone that's involved in game theory and strategy right now, they're feeling it out right now. So you might see a couple different lineups here and there, and some things that look a little bit weird on paper. But I think, as I said, and again, spring training probably wasn't the right description, but I think there is very much a sense of, it has a little bit of an April, May vibe to it, just because of so many new parts, and you're trying to figure that out. You're trying to learn about your new players, whether you're talking about your rookies coming up to the majors for the first time, or some of these veteran players that have now been dropped into a pennant race after languishing elsewhere. We're going to see how it all plays out, but good way for the Orioles to finish the weekend after what was a pretty ugly Thursday and Friday, and very frustrating Thursday and Friday in Cleveland.
6 division games ahead here. Toronto, Tampa this week. 6 more opportunities to complain about Brandon Hyde's managing, the pitching, the hitting, the defense, decision making, rookies making mistakes, umpires with poor strike zone evaluation. All that ahead on your massive dial here this week. Luke can be found at Baltimore Luke. He is out in Owings Mills all week. Ravens playing on Friday night against the Eagles. It must be August, because everybody's offering tickets all over my Facebook. Free tickets for everyone to go to the ballpark on Friday night and watch fake football. Strangely enough, I might be at the Nationals ballpark watching this Teddy Swims character on Friday night. He is Luke. We're going to be down at Fadley's on the 23rd of the month. That is our next Maryland Crab Cake Tour. It's all presented by the Maryland Lottery. Our Gold Rush Sevens doublers will have these, as well as Raven Scratch-Offs come out this month. I'll be talking to John Martin about that later on in the week as well. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, powering you up, powering Luke up as well. Make sure you get your oil change and more, all your vital fluids taken care of from our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, and the most vital fluid, water, taken care of by our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping the water in my cup clear, as well as the water in our shower and our drain very, very safe, with safe well water. at Liberty Pure. I am Nestor. He's Luke. We got plenty of baseball ahead. Orioles teetering on first place. They're trying. And the Ravens trying to get it right here this week. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We'll be in Ocean City and Mako next week talking politics, but hang around. I won't be sticking to sports.